Welcome to Explosive Enterprises. In the time since we started this channel, we've been getting a lot of really good questions, and some really dumb ones too, but that's just YouTube for you. And I thought that we'd take some time to go through and answer these questions as a start of a simple Q&A format. Before we get into that, I just want to mention that we now have a merch store, which we'll link in the description and a pinned comment, where we have some designs based on our prior work. We also have patches, various print-on-demand stuff. This helps support us because if you know anything about YouTube, you know it is not exactly the most consistent or friendly for airsoft content monetization. So if you want to support us, that's a great way to do it. If there's anything that we don't offer that you'd like to see, let us know. But anyways, let's get right into it. Some of the questions we've been getting on Discord pretty consistently have been, how did you get into airsoft? And I guess you started with AEGs. When and what made you switch to GBBRs? Now, probably noticed most of the content on our channel is gas gun focused. That's not actually because we only use gas guns. I'm pretty much a gas gun fanatic. Most of the stuff on the wall behind me is gas. But while we started playing as a team in 2011, it was really only in 2021 that I started really getting into gas guns. Got a GHK AUG in 2020 to match the real AUG that I also showed in a comparison video. And that was really, despite having dabbled with gas guns in the years prior, that was really when I got started into making it practical and figuring out what was needed to make a gas gun usable on the field as a primary and not just as a backyard plinking gimmick. Now, we plan to do a video in the near future that'll talk about various considerations in making gas guns practical, so that will be coming. But for now, yeah, I guess the general gist of it is that we all started in 2011. We've all used AEGs for the longest time. It's recently that we started getting into gas guns, and especially talking about them and doing reviews because there's a lot more to talk about. So one of the other questions we've gotten a lot is, do you plan to review AEGs? Yes, if there's an AEG that we find is interesting and relevant enough. AEG content is much better served by YouTube already. And as well, we find there isn't quite as much to talk about just because parts compatibility, they're really just shells around a gearbox. You don't have the same manual of arms and other considerations. So with gas guns, they're a little more limited in upgrade paths. They're a little more distinctive in terms of how they function, reliability, parts compatibility. There's just a lot more to talk about, and we find them more interesting to review. I have a possibly really stupid question about air bubbles in magazines. Namely, how are they a thing? Doesn't the magazine fill with air whenever it's emptied anyway? Doesn't it fill with air whenever you take it apart and have it open for maintenance? Is some air good and some air bad? How do they happen? Well, the short answer is that air in magazines is a thing, but it's not nearly as big a problem as people make it out to be, and we think that the problems that people ascribe to air bubbles are actually caused more by temperature differences. So, to start off with, you're not going to get air in a magazine whenever you shoot it to being empty. If you shoot a gun until it goes click, until it's out of gas, what's actually happened is that the propane that's in the magazine has equalized with ambient pressure at about 15 psi. Same pressure in the mag as outside the mag, so when the valve is hit, nothing happens. Unless you hold down the output valve, or the fill valve, either way, to keep it open, it's not going to allow the contents of the magazine to mix. There's still a spring that holds it closed. It's just at the same pressure as the surrounding environment. So you get air in a magazine either when it's brand new, you just got it, or if you've had it open for maintenance, like this person asked. So when you have a magazine that you just got in the mail or you've been working on and you go to try and fill it, you may find that you have difficulty getting a good fill, and then that's when people will tell you you have air bubbles in the magazine, they're taking up space that is preventing you from getting more propane in, you need to purge it. Well, what's actually going on is that the air is at 15 psi inside the magazine, same as outside the mag. When you go to fill it with room temperature propane, that's about 120 psi. That's 8 times the pressure, and that compresses the air into 1/8 of its original volume. At 1/8 of its original volume, it's barely taking up any space in the magazine. In fact, you want to have at least 1/4 to 1/2 of the magazine with gaseous headspace rather than liquid propane, otherwise you're going to have siphoning problems. The reason why you're having difficulty getting a good fill is because it's at that ambient pressure, and probably because of temperature difference. So if you take a magazine that has been shot until it's empty, but actually still full of propane, and you go to try and fill it, you're going to find the same problem. It's not going to fill very easily. But when you're dealing with magazines that you either just got or you've been working on, If it's been sitting in a box on your front step in the sun, or if it's been in a heated delivery truck, or if you've just been manipulating it in your hand and it's been warmed by body heat, it might be warmer than the tank that you're using to fill it with, and that's what makes them very difficult to fill. So if you want to test this for yourself, just take 2 magazines, hold down the release valve, empty them both, then take the base plate off of one of them and just air it out, let it mix with the ambient air, blow through it if you want, whatever, just make sure it's full of air. Put the base plate back on, let them sit for an hour to get back up to room temperature, and then try filling them. You'll find that whichever one you fill first is going to get a little more gas because the tank is going to cool down a bit as you fill, but there's not going to be any major difference between them. So the solution that we gave to air bubbles in our myths and misconceptions video is to just run gas through it to help chill it and purge the air. And yeah, purging the air is not really the most important thing, but cooling it so that you get that temperature delta, that's the important thing. Bottom line is, don't worry about air in your magazines. Just if you find you're having difficulty getting a good fill, either chill the magazine by purging it or just put the magazine in the refrigerator for 15 minutes. You won't have any trouble getting fill after that. So next up, what are some small or obscure details and or designs that impressed you the most on a GBBR? The hidden pin on the VFC MP5 made me think of this, and they mean the ejector on the MP5, which is used as the valve knocker lock on the VFC, and it has a small plastic plug that can enable or disable it. What impressed me about that system is that the ejector on an MP5 is not something that would normally have a functional purpose on a gas blowback gun, where obviously we don't have a case to eject. And VFC took that part and they repurposed it into something airsoft specific. So we have a real steel part that has no corresponding function in airsoft being used as an airsoft part that has no corresponding function in real steel. And that's some kind of clever design ingenuity that we don't see all that often. So I'm going to cheat a little bit because my answer for something else that I've seen like that isn't a gas blowback gun, but the Tanaka Single Action Army. On the Tanaka, the ejection rod is actually used as a magazine because you can fill its channel with BBs and the spring pressure will push them towards the cylinder. As you cock the cylinder and fire the gun, that spring pressure pushes the BBs into the cylinder to reload it as you shoot. So instead of having just 6 shots, as with the real thing, more than enough to kill anything that moves, you actually get up to, I believe it's 24 to 27 in total. Maybe not necessarily realistic, but it's just an interesting reuse of the same part to pull double duty and make it maybe a little more practical. All right, those were questions we got from Discord. Now let's move on to YouTube. So first off, we have lots of questions about where to get replicas and if they're in the US yet. There's a lot of fear among American airsofters about importing replicas from overseas. It's really not that big a deal. Yes, there is some risk of customs seizing it. If you use UPS, the risk is not that great. I say this having had a CAM 870 seized in Louisville, Kentucky earlier this year, but I eventually got a refund and I was able to order it again. Yeah, as long as you're paying with a credit card or with PayPal, you have coverage anyways. You're not going to be out your money entirely unless you let that protection window expire. It's not that big a deal. You can order from Hong Kong or Taiwan or Japan without too much trouble. Where did you get the Aimpoint clone on the carbine? Okay, so they're probably talking about this, which is an Aimpoint 3000, and this is not a clone. Before retro ARs made their big comeback about 2 years ago, these were fairly reasonably priced at $200 to $300. Now the market has gone very stupid, and you'll regularly see these for $600, $700, $900, $1,000 and up. Absolute rip-off of that price. There's no reason. Now, if you're still cagey about spending money on a fancy, expensive Aimpoint, even if it were for reasonable prices, there is a decent budget real steel alternative in the form of the Ultra Dot sight, which has a similar tubular profile. They come in 1-inch and 30mm versions, and you can mount this up on an AR carry handle just fine. Another alternative to consider if you're looking at retro guns is a modern micro dot or your flavor of like Comp M4, M4 clone, either on a railed carry handle adapter or on a clay Zion mount, or some of the modern clones of it, which will allow you to mount it directly to the carry handle. We're going to have a video at some point in the future about optics and which ones are useful for airsoft and which ones are a total waste of money, and whether it's worth going for real or repro, and under what circumstances. And that's going to be a fun topic that's going to be very controversial. I'm looking forward to it. So, do you have any recommendations for tools that a gas blowback owner should possess? We're also going to do that as a video, but I really feel a need to mention roll pin punches are the best thing in the world if you have to deal with roll pins. And for $10, it's probably the best ratio of headache saved to money spent that I've had on any sort of tool. It really just beats having to wail on them with screwdrivers or hex keys or whatever other ersatz solutions you can come up with to knock them out. Additionally, valve tool is really good to have. Although I don't actually use a valve tool, I use a pair of pliers, needle nose pliers that have been slightly modified, which you can see in our gas magazine maintenance video. Really just hex keys, appropriate tools for working on valves, roll pin punches, hammer. Mallet is nice to have. You want to minimize the risk of damaging things. Just a regular set of screwdrivers. You don't really need much in the way of fancy tools to work on guns. And now the ballistics video, and this was a fun one. I was actually expecting it to be a lot more controversial than it ended up being, but we still got some interesting comments I wanted to respond to. First, you can break your gearbox faster with heavy BBs. No, you cannot. I've heard this one before. I've never heard a coherent explanation for it. The gearbox in an AEG is going to cycle at the same rate whether there's a BB in the hop or not. It does not care. That BB is only receiving a minuscule amount of energy. Like a joule and a half is nothing, especially compared to the amount of energy that's going through that motor when it's spinning at pretty high RPM to pull fairly heavy springs. So the BB weight has absolutely no effect on the gearbox. You're going to sustain the same amount of wear and tear whether you're shooting a BB or no BB at all. The only exception to that might be if your hop is screwed up and the BB doesn't actually fire, then that can build up pressure, which will delay the piston moving forward, which may cause the gears to come back and hit the teeth on the piston, and that blows up your piston with gears. Not good, but that's a malfunction. That's not anything to do with the BB weight that you're using. Don't be worried about wear and tear. It's not a thing. Or rather, don't be worried about wear and tear arising from the use of heavier BBs. That's not a thing. Okay, now, this one's interesting. They say, I'm only sad you didn't touch on the Magnus Effect, which is wind speed around the BB specifically, as well as Joule creep. Someone else says you forgot the Joule creep. So the Magnus Effect is the process by which hop-up functions. It's the pressure system created by a spinning spherical object in an airstream, and the pressure difference that it creates on opposite sides produces a sideways force, or in the case of backspin, a lifting force, and that's how hop-up works. You get higher pressure below the BB, lower pressure above it, and that lifts the BB up. If you apply it to the side, that's how a curveball and baseball works. We didn't talk about it in the video because it's interesting trivia, but it's not quite as practical as we were going for, and I was already feeling nervous about that video being 10 minutes of dryly talking about BBs. Yeah, and I say this recording a Q&A where I dryly talk about questions. But there are some implications to the stability of the Magnus Effect at different speeds of projectile that might be worth getting into. There's some anecdotal evidence that if a BB is traveling above about 330 FPS is the usual figure, not equivalent of 330 with twos, but like actually 330 regardless of the weight, that it can become less stable and this can negatively impact accuracy, but we haven't actually been able to experimentally verify this, and I'm very reluctant to pass on bro science on this channel. So we'll explore a little more about that. Now, as for Joule creep, and people saying we forgot the Joule creep, we did not forget the Joule creep. Joule creep is not relevant really to the weight of BB you should be using. If your gun shoots 1.4 joules with twos and you realize, oh, I should be using 0.3s or 32s or 36s or whatever, and now it shoots 1.6 joules with the heavier BBs, congratulations. You can now either use your adjustable valve to turn down the power on a gas gun, or you can permanently reduce the power if you don't have an adjustable valve. If you have an AEG, you can use a slightly lighter spring, and that will reduce wear and tear on your gearbox. It'll also increase your rate of fire. Win-win. You're now under the limit and using heavier BBs. No reason not to. The only time when Joule creep might be relevant for your BB choice is if you want to use, say, 0.3s, and you're doing 1.4 joules of 0.3s, but then the field makes you chrono with 0.4s, and now, oh no, now you're at 1.6 joules. So there you have a choice to make. You can either turn down your power further, and maybe you'll do 1.3 with your 0.3s so that you can do 1.5 with the 0.4s and you'll be under the limit. Or my suggestion would be, frankly, just switch to 0.4s, because you're going to get higher power while still remaining within field limits, and you're going to get all the other benefits of heavy BBs we talked about. Better time to target at typical engagement ranges, longer range, better stability, resistance to wind, ability to penetrate brush, targets are more likely to call it. All those things where you would want to use heavier BBs at an equivalent power level become even more relevant when you have a little bit of extra power to play with. All right, and lastly, do you have any experience with academic writing? I notice your frequent use of we in reference to perceived phenomenon and general use of passive speech. None of us work in academia. My background is with the United States intelligence community, and as a professional nerd, I did have to write reports, and it does follow similar reporting structure, format, conventions to academia. The reason why we use we in these videos is because while I am maybe the only one terminally online enough to make constant videos, everything we do is a team effort. And I don't want to give the impression that I'm the only one actually behind this content, because none of it would be possible without the support of my teammates. And that's really all we have for today. Thanks for watching, and once again, if you want to help support our channel, check out our merch store that will link in the description and a pinned comment below. Thanks for watching.